Welcome. Welcome to Arizona. I love you all. You're my spiritual family. We are all each other's spiritual family. For many of us, the Sangha is more important than our family. Because at least here, we're seeking the esoteric, not the mundane. We're seeking to escape the world we think is there and to find something better. This brings me to the mystery of consciousness. Isn't it strange? Our bodies consists of many trillions of cells divided into a 3-pound brain, maybe a 4-pound heart, 10-pound liver, 16-pound skin, maybe 60 pounds of muscle, fat, heart, lungs. All these separate organs, and each of them consists of trillions of separate cells. And these cells themselves are very busy little bees with all kinds of things happening on the submolecular level, chemical things, physical things. And we're not directly aware of those cells. We're aware only of those areas of our bodies that are innervated, that have nerves. And out of all of this hodgepodge arises consciousness. Rolf's consciousness, Vesselina's, BJ's, Angela's, Ed's. And we seem, or the consciousness is not an accumulation or aggregation of all the trillions of cells in our body. But it seems like there's one consciousness that's aware of the body and of the world, of our own energy states, our sense of presence, the quality of our nervous system and consciousness. But isn't it strange? We have this large sensor, which is more than a sensor, but a living being surviving in the world and building a civilization that comes to think of itself in aggregate as alive, not aware of the trillions of individual cells that make us up. We think they have their own consciousness, their own way of responding to the environment, but we're not at all aware of them. We as human beings are aware of ourselves as a whole. We're aware of our awareness, the objects in our awareness. Maybe we're aware of ourselves as a unitary thing, something separate from all other human beings. At least that's the way it feels. And yet, philosophers and spiritual teachers say that the world we think we're in is not real. That it's just a construct of our nervous system, our ideas, our education. Well, that's true. But I don't think that denigrates our individual consciousness as inconsequential. To me, what happens in my own consciousness is far more important than what happened in Ramana's consciousness, or Nisargadatta's consciousness, or Muktananda's consciousness. Ramana has had millions of followers since he died and when he lived. They read the story of his spiritual development, his death experience at age 16, running off to a remote village, and the story of how he got there with the 3 pence required for his education, and how he is 1 cent short because he gave it away. And he had to walk a long distance. And then when he got there, he stayed at the temples, outside the temples, and then the caves. And one temple where he lived for many years in the basement. He didn't move. Can you imagine the mind state where the body does not move? Ramana was witnessing something, watching something that so totally fascinated him. He became unaware of his surroundings. As he said, he became aware of central vitality in himself, which he called the I, or the self. And he said it had been there before, but it wasn't that important to him before. But after his awakening experience, he realized that that center, that energetic center, where all kinds of incredible things were happening. Thoughts were coming out of, energies were coming out of, intuitions were coming out of, his own life force was coming out of. All that he could do is spend all day watching the show of himself unfolding to himself. And then since then, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people have tried to emulate and repeat Ramana's experience, thinking somehow they want to be in such a state where they don't move for 20 years and they get to experience all kinds of things that they think he might have felt without knowing what he felt, since he doesn't really describe much about the states he was in. But imagine this. Imagine somebody who had the kind of mind, kind of beingness that lost all interest in the external world, and just disappeared into his internal world, where he'd watch the self bursting forth with energies, with understanding, with power, always unfolding. And he just stays still all day long, watching it. Do you wonder why it's so hard to get Ramana's enlightenment? Because not one person in 100,000 has that kind of dedication or obsession as did he regarding that central power plant inside of himself that he witnessed as a phenomena, not as something beyond creation, but he witnessed the power of spirit unfolding, the energies flowing. For 20 years, he sat in his own pee, with insects biting him, and his bleeding began sticking him to the floor. People would come and feed him spoonfuls of food. Otherwise, he wouldn't eat. Do you wonder why you haven't been able to obtain Ramana's understanding? Do you think for 1 minute you could stay 20 years in one place, looking at yourself, stuck to the floor? But that's Ramana's dharma. It's not yours. You have to know you. You don't want to repeat Ramana's state. That was his particularly. And I don't think 1 out of 10,000 that actually followed him attained anything like him in terms of fixation. Yes, one can say Robert was very much like him. He was the most unusual man or teacher I've ever known. And I could see too how he was always fixed on his inner experience and could sit all day long in his rocker looking at the mountain outside in total peace, looking at the garden, and was forced by his disease to be a teacher and make money that way for his family. So at the end of his life, after we've transcribed 300 or so talks, as he was dying, he turned the whole association over to his wife, Nicole, who became obsessed with the transcripts and ownership of the transcripts, which was passed on to the senior members of Robert Adams' Infinity Institute. And for 30 years since then, they've been hounding people who talk about Robert or post his picture or even write about their experiences with Robert. It's obvious that they never had Robert's experience of equanimity and peace. But Robert wasn't the man he thought he was either. So many people identified Robert as an image, as a concept, with his teachings. And in a sense, they couldn't even find a man in that idealization they had of Robert that could pee or shit, who is so utterly pure, so utterly removed from the world. But Robert wasn't. He was very much engaged in the world, in taking care of his wife and children, raising many foster children, getting the teachings published, teaching people from all over the world who wrote letters. It's just that he was far more peaceful than anybody else around him, far less distracted, far less moved by events. He almost never got angry. And he had a little smile often when somebody did something totally egotistical and self-involved. He just chuckled, then figure out some way to make that person more humble by setting up situations that they'd encounter these lasting images and feelings inside of themselves. So many of his students just sat around watching Robert, trying to get his state of peace. And even now, I get new students writing me, wanting to know what Robert was like, what he did for fun. And they think Robert's his teachings. Robert wasn't his teachings. Robert liked his female students and their company. Robert would buy flowers and chocolate for his favorite female students when it's their birthday time. And they go out for a romantic dinner somewhere. Robert loved women because they were more unusual than men. They were easier to get to emotionally. They weren't wrapped up in their heads. I think he found them to have more ability to love and express love than his male students. And he needed that too, because he was so lacking in emotionality himself. And having it around allowed him to continuously experience it for himself as a human being. But that's enough of that. I think I have some knowledge of Robert's resting state, of how he was in his chair, looking out at Capitol Butte, the quietness that he felt, the peace that he felt. I feel that too, but not all the time. Sometimes I feel ecstatic energies inside of me. Sometimes I feel deep peace. Sometimes I feel flowing energies inside of me, like rivers, sometimes with color, sometimes not. And usually present is a sense of the divine other inside me, almost like an entity, but not quite a personality, not somebody I could really talk to, but somebody I'd recognize as a spiritual entity inside of me. And then I would recognize that I felt myself as being separate from this spiritual entity because I would talk about perceiving him. And that must make me as a perceiver separate. So what is this perceiver? One of the perceivers I felt was the manifest entity, Ed. I talk about this as being the incarnation of Ed Musica. And on the other hand, there's still the witness, which is apart from the manifest Ed, apart from the perception of Robert Adams. And who can say what this is? The Advaitins would say, it's the witness from a different dimension. Psychologists might say, it's a split off part of the mind that's acting as an observer. What is the truth? What is the truth? Because in all my years of spirituality, I've realized there is no truth. Even those who are very advanced and can describe all kinds of energetic states are using words from the mundane world, really, to describe their experiences. And it's very hard to describe what these experiences mean to them in terms of the mundane world. So they have to learn other ways of speaking or talking or communicating than using just words. They use metaphors, analogies. They use a poetic tone of voice. They radiate energies directly so people can feel them. Or they whisper nothings into the ears of listeners and make them feel loved. But all in all, I think all the great teachers recognize that there is no truth. What there are is a lot of old farts lying around or talking to people, telling them about reality the way it really is, and being totally full of shit because they're just adding on another layer of truth over the person's fundamental experience of nothingness or of their own mundane world. The six patriarchs said it best, I think, but he said it in Chinese and I say it in English. The only truth is that there is no truth. Beware even of this truth. Or as my friend Lee Worth said, everything in science, everything in philosophy is no more than convenient fiction. It's not real, but we can use its imaginary truth to build atomic weapons, trains, automobiles, create vaccines, create healing methods, create all kinds of things. A Hubble telescope. But there's no such thing as absolute truth. What is called truth changes throughout the ages. The truth of Newton lasted 200 or 300 years. Then it became the truth of Einstein. Then it became truth of the quantum mechanics people. And then it became string theory and all the other gamut of cosmologies. And these cosmologies change year by year, depending on the mathematics being used and who's popular and who's not popular. We live in an age where there is no truth. Trump is proving that. You can take something that's obviously truth and make it untrue by sheer repetition. Hitler knew that too. The big lie, repeated often enough and people take it as truth. So you have to get used to it. Living in no truth. And instead, finding that living immersed in your own consciousness, your own awareness, is more than what anyone could tell you about. Maybe you can't sit still in it for 20 years, not eating unless food was brought to you, or drinking unless food is brought to you. You can do it for an hour at a time, minute at a time, and just learn to immerse yourself in your own experience without words. The unformed truth, the unstated truth. Nisargadatta called it beingness, which Robert called as the gap, the experience between thoughts, or the experience of resting in your beingness between the time you woke up and coming out of nothingness and coming into somethingness in the recognition that the world was there and you were in the world. And he used to teach all the time, try to stay in that gap. Really, it's a wonderful kind of experience to be able to find the gap and then move back and forth into nothingness and then out of nothingness into the gap, and then being awake and being a body mind, and then being so rested that you could just move back into the gap again and into nothingness again, or into the dream state. And you can play with that time after time, and you could learn so much in that borderline area. There are so many things in heaven and earth that are not dreamt of in our philosophies. There may be spirits all around us, like some claim. Chaitananda has said that the spirits have left this world. They're pissed by what we've done with it. And when they come back, they won't be happy. Others claim to be dealing with the spirits all the time, with angels, with God. Others claim that there are no such thing as spirits. I don't know. It's not really important to me. If they leave me alone, I leave them alone. Who can say? Maybe they're controlling me, but I don't feel it. But I do feel my beingness. That sense of being alive. That sense of being a separate entity that's filled with a kind of joy and ease of being as Jan Klein called it. Just resting in one's own awareness, one's own consciousness. This is what, who is his name? Nisargadatta's successor, so to speak, the one that did all the writing, Balsekar. He said the essence of Nisargadatta's teachings was just to give rest to all the searching and be still in one's own self. To be still in one's own self. Accepting one's limited humanity. And through acceptance, transcending limited humanity to become pure beingness. The basic consciousness in all humans, which very few ever really know, because they know about things and states. They don't know what it's like to be resting in the happiness of themselves. Robert would also say this sometimes, but most of the time, he'd talk about silence, talk about you're not the body, you're Brahman, your consciousness itself. And in a sense, he beat around the bush by filling them people with stories about a different world than the human world. And that's true. People live in a created world of ideas and concepts, and he could take you out of that. But his method was not very effective. I do not think he reached many people to get to the final states of freedom. Does anybody have any questions or statements?